Hello students, welcome back to another online lecture of the online lecture series initiated by Shet Vidya Mandir, English High School and Junior College of Science and Commerce, Vasai. I am Mrs. Snehal Falkau. Students, today we are going to study a poem from section 2 of your English course book. The name of the poem is Father Returning Home, composed by depicts. Let us now learn more about the poet. Depicts was a celebrated bilingual poet. That is, he wrote in two languages, viz. English and Marathi. He was an able translator with a remarkable work in Marathi and English. His versatile creativity extends to painting, filmmaking, and his notable contribution as a magazine columnist. He had started translation of literary work of saints in Marathi at the age of 16. His father used to publish an important periodical named Abhiruchi, and perhaps it had a great influence upon his career. Dilip himself went on to publish one named Shabda along with Arun Kolatkar and Ramesh Samartha. He was one of the most important figures behind the Little magazine movement of the 60s in Marathi. His Ekun Kavita or collected poems were published in the 1990s in 3 volumes. He also edited an anthology of Marathi poetry. He received the prestigious Sahitya Academy Award for poetry as well as for his well-known translation work Says Tuka, Popular Abhangas means spiritual poems by Sant Tukaram. Exile, alienation, self-disintegration, and death are observed to be the major themes of his work. Now, let us take a look at some information about the poem. The poem Father Returning Home is taken from Traveling in a Cage. It is an autobiographical poem where the poet shows the loneliness and world weariness of an old man in the modern society who is unable to be abreast with the fast-paced materialistic world of the urban society. In the poem, Dilip Chitre brings in the memory of his father traveling home from work. This poem is a true account of the poet's father Purushottam Chitre's life in 1957 when they moved from his birth town of Baroda to Mumbai to try and better his life. The poem is expressive of the poet's feeling for his father at a later stage. He realized how neglected and uncared for his father was even after being the only bread earner for the family. But the poem Father Returning Home has gone beyond its autobiographical significance. It is now an account of any old man who does the hard work for his family but leads a monotonous, that is, a dull life where no one is there to take care of him, to converse with him, or to understand his feelings. The poem Father Returning Home consists of 2 stanzas of 12 lines each. It is written in free verse with no particular meter or rhyme scheme followed, and the lack of rhythm is symbolic of the poet's father's uncared for life. The language in the poem is easy and simple, but full of symbolic expressions and poetic devices. It is written in the first person narrative, where the poet, who is the speaker, narrates how his father returns home and what he does thereafter. The atmosphere within the poem is rather gloomy and pessimistic. Now, let us take a look at the poem. Father returning home. My father travels on the late evening train, standing among silent commuters in the yellow light. Suburbs slide past his unseeing eyes. His shirt and pants are soggy and his black raincoat stained with mud and his bag stuffed with books is falling apart. His eyes, dimmed by age, fade homeward through the humid monsoon night. Now I can see him getting off the train, like a word dropped from a long sentence. He hurries across the length of the grey platform, crosses the railway line, enters the lane. His chappals are sticky with mud, but he hurries onward. Home again, I see him drinking weak tea, eating a stale chapati, reading a book. He goes into the toilet to contemplate man's estrangement from a man-made world. Coming out, he trembles at the sink, the cold water running over his brown hands. A few droplets cling to the graying hair on his wrists. His sullen children have often refused to share jokes and secrets with him. He will now go to sleep, listening to the static on the radio, dreaming of his ancestors and grandchildren, thinking of nomads entering a subcontinent through a narrow pass. Written by depicts. Now, let us analyze the poem line by line. My father travels on the late evening train, standing among silent commuters in the yellow light. The poem begins with the speaker's description of his father traveling home. The father is traveling in a late evening train after finishing his work for the day. Late evening train may indicate how long the father works so that it regularly gets that late for him to return home. The father is standing among the silent commuters in the yellow light inside the train compartment. Commuters means those who travel regularly from one place to another, typically for work. This line is indicative of his sufferings during his train journey. After working so hard, he is returning home standing on the footboard, as he does not get a seat there to relax. The silent commuters indicate that the passengers are not friendly enough to talk with him or among themselves. The yellow light is not the best thing either to promote any cheerfulness in his life. All these things further intensify his agony and make his train journey monotonous, that is, dull. Suburbs slide past his unseeing eyes. The suburbs, that is the residential areas, are sliding past the moving train. But the poet's father has no intention to look at those suburbs. He is unmoved by these scenes that he sees from the train because he has seen those many a times and finds nothing new or interesting in it. So, the sliding landscapes also add to the sense of monotony. Monotony means the quality of being repetitive or lacking variety. His shirt and pants are soggy and his black raincoat stained with mud and his bag stuffed with books is falling apart. Here, the poet makes us know that it was a rainy day. His father's clothes are all soggy, that is, wet with the rain water. And the black raincoat is stained with mud. The bag he was carrying was stuffed with books, and he was struggling to handle the bag. These lines are again indicative of the difficulties the poet's father has to face during his journey. It gets even worse in the rainy season. The black raincoat might indicate the lack of color in his dull life. Again, his bag full of books hints that he was an educated and scholarly man, not that unimportant that one would think from his ordinary routine journey. His eyes, dimmed by age, fade homeward through the humid monsoon night. Here, the poet gives us an impression of his father's age. His eyesight is dimmed by his old age. The father looks homeward with his low vision through the humid monsoon night. The gloomy atmosphere of the monsoon night also adds to the dullness of his life. Now I can see him getting off the train like a word dropped from a long sentence. The poet's father gets down from the train. Here, depicts, the poet, has used a fine simile in comparing his father to an unimportant word in a long sentence. This is quite unique. He says that his father gets down from a train just like a word dropped from a long sentence. Just like that word which is not important, and when it is dropped from a sentence, it does not make any difference to the sentence. The poet indicates how unimportant his father is to the crowd in the train. It does not really make any difference whether he got down or not. He is not that relevant to the rest of the world. He hurries across the length of the grey platform, crosses the railway line, enters the lane. His chappals are sticky with mud, but he hurries onward. After getting off the train, the father hurries towards his home. He crosses the great platform and the railway line and finally enters the lane that leads towards his home. His chappals are sticky with mud, yet he does not walk slowly and instead hurries onward to reach his home. The platform is grey in color because it is made up of grey cement. The color grey suggests old age, dullness, and sordidness, that is, unworthiness of the father's life. The poet has used the word hurries. He has used this word twice to bring in a sense of escapism from the dull, humid atmosphere, grey platform, and muddy streets where no one would care for him. So he hurries and just wants some solace at his own home. Solace means peace, home again. I see him drinking weak tea, eating a stale chapati, reading a book. Here the second stanza begins. In this stanza, the poet depicts the isolation of the father in his own home. The poet sees his father reach home again like other days. Then he sees him drink weak tea and eat a stale chapati. The poet hints at how nobody cares for him even in his own home. But the father does not have any complaint with his tea, which is not good enough and strong, or the food, which is stale, means not freshly made. He does not complain because he is used to this. He reads so as to pass time in his house. He has probably given up on anyone and does not expect any form of care from his family members. He goes into the toilet to contemplate man's estrangement from a man-made world. Here, the poet's father goes into the toilet to contemplate, that is, to think deeply. He contemplates on how man's estrangement, that is, alienation or isolation from the man-made world. He wonders how a man can be a stranger in a city teeming with millions of other men. Humans built the city. So how come humans feel estranged in a world they themselves created? This line nearly sums up the theme of the entire poem. The father is indeed aware of his estranged situation and hopes to find some support in the family when he hurries towards his home. But the hope is diminished as he reaches and finds the same indifference there. Moreover, the toilet might act as a symbol of how small his world has been. The toilet seems to be the only place the man has to go to contemplate over his loneliness and isolation. Coming out, he trembles at the sink, the cold water running over his brown hands. The father comes out from the toilet and goes to wash his hands at the sink. The speaker observed him trembling at the sink when cold water was running down his brown hands. This trembling or shivering might be due to his old age, the coldness of the water, and also the fearful thought of his isolation from the rest of the world. A few droplets cling to the graying hair on his wrists. A few droplets of water clinging to the grey hair on his wrists may have a greater implication. Water generally symbolizes life, and grey hair stand for the old age. So, the old man's life is just holding on to his old age. This life has no significance to anyone else around him. His sullen children have often refused to share jokes and secrets with him. Here, the poet goes on to talk about the old man's relationship with his family members. His sullen means bad-tempered children refuse to share jokes and secrets with him. This indicates that they don't share a close and friendly association with their father. The refusal of his children to share jokes or secrets with him suggests lack of concern or the generation gap between the father and his children. He will now go to sleep, listening to the static on the radio, dreaming of his ancestors and grandchildren, thinking of nomads entering a subcontinent through a narrow pass. We are in the final stage of the poem where we see that the unfriendliness and indifference the father experiences around himself have caused him to withdraw into a solitary world of his own. In this stanza, we see him going to sleep, listening to the radio, and thinking of many things like his ancestors, his grandchildren, and of the nomads with no static home who entered the Indian subcontinent through the pass in the ancient time and overcame hardships to discover a new land. The sound of the radio is static, means noisy, giving another reference to the old man's miserable life. However, his dreaming of his ancestors who have died long ago and his grandchildren who are yet to be born gives the impression that he finds some solace, means peace and comfort in thinking about his past and future generation. It is an attempt to escape from his mundane, means ordinary routine life, which is lacking human contact. Again, his thought of the nomads indicate that he is thinking of how the society has changed since the ancient times when they had come to live here. Now, this modern world has no place for the elderly people. There is no one to think about their loneliness or care for them. The major themes in the poem include alienation, rootlessness, old age in a modern society, isolation, cultural identity, and the generation gap. Now, let us quickly look at the appreciation of the poem. The poem, Father Returning Home, draws a portrait of a lonely and estranged old family man. The poem explores the life of a father on a single day, whose sullen children no longer interact with him. It depicts his dull, monotonous, exhausting, and equally pitiable daily routine. It describes a forced alienation at home, which is reflected through the stale food and the lack of sharing and talking with him. His children refuse to share their joys and sorrows with the hard-working father who, as a result, is forced to retire into solitude and sit lonely and go into his own little world. This very painful loneliness is a symbol of man's isolation from the materialistic man-made world. In this materialistic world, we have distanced ourselves from a very essential value system which has built our society. Disintegration, joint family system, quest for more luxury, thirst for more money has eroded the very basis on which our society was structured, that is, family and human relationships. It is visible in the reference to the state of affairs in the life of the father, since he doesn't get any company at home too. Nobody cares for him or waits for him, and he doesn't even expect anything from his children. As a result, like a typical alienated and neglected individual, he creates his own world and develops his own company. The old father withdraws into that world which comprises his thoughts, books, and radio. The world of sleep provides the much needed company to him, since he unfolds into its embrace and it comforts him thereby, immersing him and enriching him in a wealth of dreams. It is evident that he is an educated and well-learned individual, since he ruminates over many topics including sociological and historical. The poem conveys an overwhelming self of sordidness, dark and depressing, something without hope, and hopelessness of a man's modern life. Thus, the poem Father Returning Home, written by depicts, sympathizes with the old and neglected people in our society. He gives us a message that we should take care of our parents and other old people in the family. We should try and talk to them and make them feel loved all the time. That's all from today's video. Thank you.